My name is Lucinda, and I just turned 22 when I graduated from college with a degree in business administration, which I should have been happy about, but it was on that day when I thought I would finally be able to afford a break that fate decided to present me with another challenge. I lived in an old but cozy apartment that once belonged to my grandmother, and now officially became the property of my father after her death 3 years ago. And although this place always seemed familiar to me, filling me with memories of childhood, now it's suddenly ceased to be my refuge, because my parents decided that the time has come for me to start paying for my independence not only with responsibility, but also with money. I couldn't say that I was shocked. No, I understood that adulthood involves expenses, that you can't always enjoy the privileges of childhood, but the way it was presented left an unpleasant aftertaste. The whole evening, filled with the warmth of a family holiday, crumbled to dust at the moment when my mother, with carefully concealed tension in her voice, informed me about the need to pay rent for the apartment in which I lived. I felt my heart tighten, and my fingers tightened a little on the porcelain cup of unfinished coffee as she explained the conditions. Of course, the amount would be lower than the market, because I'm a family, but that didn't change the fact that I now urgently needed to look for a permanent job, because the salary I received for shifts at Luigi's restaurant were barely enough to pay for utilities and modest purchases at the corner grocery store. Dad, who was sitting across from me, carefully avoided my gaze, concentrating on his cup, and Emily, my younger sister, pretending to be carelessly flipping through the tape on her phone, watched the scene out of the corner of her eye, clearly waiting for my reaction, and I knew that if I let my emotions run wild, would regret it later. So I just nodded, squeezed out a short, "I understand," and, waiting for dinner to end, left as soon as possible, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness, fatigue, and anxiety. That night, lying on my bed in the dark, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying to realize that everything would change from now on, that I could no longer afford to be frivolous, that I needed to do something urgently. I opened my phone and started feverishly scrolling through job sites, realizing that now I needed not just a temporary part-time job, but something more serious, stable, and able to cover my new expenses. There weren't many options. It's not easy to find a decent job without experience, but I couldn't afford to panic. I had to act, and I was going to do everything to get out of this situation with dignity. The next year was spent in an endless routine: work, paying bills, trying to get used to an adult life where no one can protect you if something goes wrong, and only you are responsible for everything that happens to you. After graduating from college, I was lucky enough to find a decent job at a small but stable marketing firm located just a few blocks from my house, and although the position of junior customer service coordinator was not the limit of my dreams, it allowed me to pay the rent that my parents had assigned me, cover utility costs, and even save a little bit. Money, even if not for something global, but at least in case of unforeseen circumstances. Every month, I regularly transferred the required amount to my mother's account, sometimes even a little more than was required, because I wanted to show that I was coping, that adult life did not frighten me, that I was able to provide for myself, and, probably, somewhere deep down, I still wanted to earn her approval, even though I didn't even admit it to myself. Emily, my younger sister, came to see me from time to time, but more often than not it was related not to the desire to spend time together, but to her own needs. She needed help with college, with homework, or she just wanted to rummage through my closet in search of new clothes that she could have taken it without asking, sure that I wouldn't say anything. She was in her final year of school, and I noticed how she was changing, becoming more secretive, distant, talking less about her life, and when she did share something, her stories were filled with a strange mixture of self-confidence and teenage uncertainty. Lately, our conversations have increasingly focused on her boyfriend Jason, whom she started dating about 6 months ago. I remember the first time I saw him, tall, thin, with an impudent smile. He seemed quite harmless, but there was something about him that made me wary, some subtle feeling that there was something more behind the polite words. Perhaps I was alarmed by his way of talking about the future, about the money he was going to earn in an easy way, about grandiose plans that had no real basis. Or maybe it was his attitude towards Emily. He acted as if her affection for him was something that was taken for granted, as if he took care for granted without offering anything in return. I didn't tell Emily about my doubts, she wouldn't have listened anyway. But all this seemed unimportant at the moment when the phone call rang, which changed everything. Mom's voice was strained, almost trembling, as she said, "Lucinda, you need to come right away. It's important." I automatically assumed that it was about Emily's admission. She still couldn't make up her mind about choosing a university, and perhaps her parents wanted to discuss financial issues or scholarship options, because her sister had quite decent grades, even if not as high as mine at the time, but enough to enroll in a good state university. I was so wrong. When I entered my parents' house that evening, the atmosphere in the living room was tense, almost oppressive. Mom and Dad were sitting in their usual places on the couch, looking older than usual, and Emily was sitting in a chair across from them with an expression that could have been called smug if I hadn't seen the hidden tension in her eyes. I slowly sat down on the edge of the pouf, feeling my heart begin to beat faster, sensing the impending storm, but not understanding its cause. "Sit down, Lucinda," her father finally said. His voice was even, but there was something in it that I hadn't heard before, a kind of weariness, as if he had aged a few years in recent days. I clasped my hands, gathering my thoughts, but before I could say anything, Mom broke the silence with words that took my breath away. "Emily is pregnant." I stared at her, then at my sister, then back at her, trying to make sense of those two words, which seemed to sound too casual, too calm to match their weight. Pregnant? Emily? She's only 18, her boyfriend works part-time at an electronics store. They have no stability, no future, no chance of coping with this without the help of their parents. I looked at my sister, expecting to see fear or at least alarm, but instead she was looking at me with an expression that looked more like a challenge, and I suddenly felt afraid, not for her, but for myself, because I understood what this meant for the whole family. "We need to discuss something else," Mom said after a short pause, straightening up and smoothing her skirt, which was her habit when she was preparing to say something unpleasant. "Emily and Jason will need a place to live." I already knew what she was going to say next, before I heard the words that completely turned my life around. "They will move into your apartment." I felt as if I had been hit, as if someone had pulled the earth out from under me, leaving me hanging in the void, unable to move or realize what was happening. The room spun slightly, the walls seemed to tilt, and I had to grab onto the edge of the pouf to keep from collapsing under the weight of what had just been said. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to move out." Mom's voice sounded flat, without a shadow of doubt or regret, as if she were discussing a completely mundane thing, such as which milk is better to buy or whether it's worth taking an umbrella with you tomorrow. "Emily and Jason need to start a family somewhere," she continued with the same calmness, "and this is the perfect solution. The apartment is already furnished, located in a good area, not far from Jason's parents." I raised my eyes and looked at my sister, and what I saw made everything boil with anger and impotence inside. Emily, sitting in a chair, lazily looked at her freshly painted nails, and a pleased, almost victorious grin played on her face, as if she knew in advance that this would happen, that the decision had long been made. "It's accepted that everything is already a foregone conclusion, and they won't even give me the opportunity to say something against it." She didn't even have the decency to look even a little embarrassed. It didn't even occur to her that she was literally kicking her own sister out of the house, without feeling a drop of shame or guilt. I glanced at her clothes and suddenly noticed that she was wearing my old sweater, the one she had borrowed a month ago and never returned, and it seems that now it has officially become her property, just as my apartment was about to become hers. Because Mom wanted it that way, because it would be convenient. "I'll find time to find a new place to live," I barely managed to say it with restraint, despite the fact that everything inside was bubbling with indignation. My mind was racing chaotically about how difficult it would be to find an apartment while working full-time, how much time, effort, and money it would take, and how much it would complicate my already difficult life. "A week should be enough," Mom replied indifferently, and then, as if remembering something insignificant that wasn't worth much attention, she added, "Oh, and Lucinda." I looked up, bracing myself for another blow. "You'll still need to keep paying the rent." For a second, It seemed to me that I had misheard her, that she couldn't have meant it, that this was some kind of malicious joke, and I even laughed, briefly, sharply, involuntarily. But when I saw that their faces remained absolutely serious, my laughter instantly stuck in my throat. "You can't be serious," I barely recognized my voice. "Your sister and Jason are still very young," Mom explained in a tone that usually speaks to young children, trying to convey the obvious things to them. "They don't have a stable job yet, and with the baby's birth approaching." She waved her hand vaguely at Emily's stomach, which was still flat. I could feel the indignation building in me, the anger pulsing, pressing down from within, demanding a way out, demanding that I say everything I think. "Let me clarify." I could barely contain the tremor in my voice, from excitement, from rage, from a sharp sense of injustice. "Do you want me to move out, and at the same time continue to pay for the apartment in which I will no longer live?" "They will need our help," my father spoke for the first time, and I met his gaze, trying to find in him at least a particle of doubt, at least a hint that he does not support it was an absurd decision, but his face remained as unreadable as ever. "It's your responsibility as an older sister. The family helps the family." "My responsibility?" I stood up abruptly, feeling my hands tremble with anger. "If they are old enough to have a child, then they are old enough to work and provide for themselves. Did any of them even look for a job? How can you be so selfish?" Emily suddenly sobbed, and her eyes instantly filled with tears, the same tears I've seen 100 times when she wanted something, whether it was a new phone at 12 or permission to go to a party at 14. "I'm going to be a mother," she continued with a tremor in her voice. "Don't you care about your future nephew or niece?" "You're very ungrateful," Mom said icily, and barely restrained rage sounded in her voice. "After all we've done for you." "Ungrateful?" I smiled bitterly. "I've been paying you rent regularly for a whole year. I've been working since college. I haven't asked anyone for help, and now you want me to support two perfectly capable adults who have forced themselves into this situation? I won't pay a cent for them. If you want to resolve this, it's your choice, but don't count on me." I abruptly turned around and left the house to their screams that I was selfish, that I was betraying my family, that I had to help my sister, and when the front door closed behind me with a thud, I felt that something inside me had also closed forever, that this was the end of more than just a conversation. Not just one chapter of my life, but something much bigger, something that can't be brought back. I didn't wait a week. That same night, I started packing, unable to stay in the place that was supposed to be my home anymore, but now it has become a stranger. Tears flowed down my cheeks as I sorted through clothes, books, and photographs, remembering everything that had happened over the years, and each item that I put in the box seemed to me like a farewell, to the past, to hopes, and to illusions. Fortunately, I had savings, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I had done the right thing when I didn't spend them on something fleeting, but saved, accumulated, and prepared for the black day that has now officially arrived. All those extra hours at Luigi's, the endless overworking, the tips that I carefully put in a separate envelope, finally paid off. Now I could afford at least a little respite, allow myself a new life, even if it didn't start quite the way I once imagined. I found a small studio apartment on the other side of town, unremarkable, with cracked walls and a tiny kitchen that barely held a stove and a single wash basin, with a bathroom in need of renovation, and windows overlooking a noisy street where cars honked incessantly at night. It took longer to get to work, and it took almost twice as long to get there, but despite all these disadvantages, the apartment was mine. A place where no one could tell me that I was here temporarily, that I owed someone something, that I had no right to control my own life. When I was packing, trying to do it quickly and without unnecessary emotions, I made detailed lists of everything in the apartment, dividing the items into categories, remembering who paid for what, who owned what. All the furniture that my parents had bought remained in their places, the old sofa from the basement, which probably no one missed, the dining table that once belonged to my grandmother, the bookshelf that my father had assembled when I first moved into this apartment, but the books that filled it belonged to me. I methodically put them in boxes, carefully packing my favorite novels, textbooks that I would no longer need, but which I could not just leave, magazines, old notebooks with notes and plans that I wrote in the early years of my studies. The clothes from my closet, the kitchen utensils, every mug, every plate, every spoon that I bought myself were packed in boxes and marked with my name, as if I needed a reminder that I really owned something in this life. My coffee maker, which I bought after my first bonus at work, my laptop, purchased with the money I saved up for 3 months of working at Luigi's, my bed, bought in parts, first the frame, then the mattress, then the bed linen, when I finally could afford a little comfort. Everything that I had ever acquired on my own, everything that symbolized my independence, was now moving into boxes to find a new home with me. It took 2 days to move. I took the weekend off, and my boss, Sarah, was understanding, not asking any questions, although she probably guessed that the reason was much deeper than just a change of residence. I didn't go into explanations. All I needed was to finish this process as quickly as possible, close this stage, leave everything behind. When the last box was loaded into the car, I drove past my parents' house without getting out of the car, without pausing, without allowing myself to change my mind, and without saying a word. I just slipped the apartment key under the door. I didn't leave a note, I didn't write a single message. It seemed to me that everything had already been said, that no explanation was needed, that I no longer wanted and couldn't justify myself for just wanting to live my own life. A week has passed. My phone exploded with notifications, messages, missed calls, endless attempts at communication, but I didn't answer until at some point I gave up and picked up the phone. "What did you do to the apartment?" Mom's voice rang with rage, breaking into a squeal, and I didn't even need to see her face to imagine how she was clutching the phone in her hand, with what force she was squeezing her lips, how her eyes were burning. "Why is it empty?" I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to speak calmly, not letting my emotions get the better of me again, because it wouldn't change anything, because I didn't want to get into endless explanations that wouldn't lead to anything good anyway. "Everything that was there when I moved in is still there," I said in a flat voice. But where is everything else? Where are the dishes? Where is the equipment? Where? "Lucinda, what did you do?" "I only took what was mine," I repeated with emphasis. "Everything that I bought with my own money. The money I earned working during college. Maybe Emily and Jason will try to do the same." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line, and then there was a stream of furious, almost incoherent accusations in which I was called selfish, ungrateful, heartless, and perhaps if I had heard this a year ago, it would have hurt me, but now I just listened, indifferently watching as the words lost their power, how they can't hurt me like they used to. "You little..." Mom stammered, and then a series of expressions followed that I could barely contain my surprise, having never heard her like this before. I didn't listen to the rest. I just broke the call and put the phone next to me. That night, sitting on the mattress in my new apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes, I cried for the first time. I cried not out of anger, not because of injustice, but because, despite everything, despite the pain, betrayal, disappointment, I still missed the family that I thought I had, my sister, who has now become a stranger. For her parents, who decided that her mistakes were more important than my life. But most of all, I cried for myself. Because of that naive girl who once believed that hard work and doing the right thing would mean something in this world. How quickly things change. A year ago, I was a good daughter, part of the family. Now I was an outcast. And the only place where my efforts really mattered was at work. I plunged into it with such intensity that it even surprised me. I took on any additional responsibilities, stayed after shifts, and performed tasks that no one wanted to take on. My boss, Sarah, noticed my dedication and gradually began to trust me more and more. When a major client needed a specialist at 2 o'clock in the morning to deal with a crisis on social media, I volunteered. When the office needed someone to work on an urgent project over the weekend, I was there. Work has become my refuge. The only place where I felt that my efforts were truly appreciated. Soon after that, I got another promotion, and although I was always proud of my work and the results I achieved, this time it brought me special satisfaction, because now I could afford to start looking not just for a better apartment, but for my own house, a place that would belong only to me, where no one could. I would like to say that I am living temporarily or at someone else's expense. I opened a separate savings account specifically designed for the down payment, and every month I put aside a certain amount there, imagining the day when I would finally be able to sign the documents and receive the keys to the apartment, for which I was solely responsible. Over the past year, my tiny studio has become almost my own. I got used to its shortcomings, to the creaking floors and old pipes that periodically hummed, to the noise of the street outside the window, and to the cramped kitchen where I could only cook in turn with myself. But despite this, I dreamed of more. I wanted a spacious kitchen where you can not just brew coffee on the run, but cook something real, something of your own, and not just reheat semi-finished products. I wanted a bathroom where I wouldn't have to be afraid to touch the walls. I dreamed of a balcony where I could go out in the morning with a cup of tea and look at the city, and not at the neighboring gray wall. I focused on my work, and to be honest, it was easier for me not to think about my family, my parents' house, and the fact that I had once been a part of their lives, until I started coming across photos of my newborn nephew on social media. I had never met him personally, but here he was looking at me from the phone screen, a tiny face, chubby cheeks, hands reaching for the camera, the first helpless expression, the first smiles, captured and presented to the world as if everything that had happened had never taken place. From the fragmentary phrases I heard through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Emily and Jason were engaged, that they were continuing to live in my old apartment, playing happy family while my parents paid all their bills, and this thought either amused or annoyed me. I couldn't even understand what I feel about this. And then, unexpectedly, an email appeared in my email, sent from an address that I recognized immediately. My heart squeezed for a moment when I saw the sender's name. "Hello, little sister," I read, feeling a mixture of irritation, something like sadness building up inside. "I hope you're okay. I heard that you've been promoted. Congratulations. I would really like you to come visit and meet your nephew. He's so sweet, such an angel, and I'm sure you'll love him. Besides, I've heard that you're doing well financially right now." And that's when I should have known that nothing ever comes from Emily. Before I could even think about how to respond, the second letter arrived, and as soon as I opened it, it became clear why she needed to remind me of my existence. List. Not just a list, but a list of wishes, children's items, and branded clothing that would make my credit card cry tears of blood. A stroller that cost more than the price of my laptop. Premium toys, each of which probably cost more than Jason's monthly salary, if, of course, he was still working at all. I sat and stared at the screen, wondering if this was some kind of joke. I couldn't believe that after all that had happened, after a year of complete silence, complete lack of interest in me, that's how she decided to reconnect, not with apologies, not an attempt to admit her guilt, but with an impudent shopping list. As if I owed her something. I typed in a short answer. "Are you already working?" A simple, clear phrase that deliberately ignores her entire list, and, of course, her answer didn't take long. "Oh, Mom and Dad take care of everything." Emily replied as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "They pay the bills and give us pocket money, so Jason and I don't have to work yet. We are focused on being parents. It's such an important job, you know?" And then there came a moment when I almost dropped the phone. "Actually, we are thinking about having more children." I reread that sentence 3 times before catching my breath, hoping I was just imagining things. "Mom and Dad are such losers," she continued. "I mean, they support us so much that they will have to continue to help us if we have another child. We're also planning a big wedding. Nothing cheap, of course. These old fools will pay for everything." I stared at the screen, feeling an icy emptiness grow inside me, a cold, sticky realization that my little sister had turned into someone I no longer recognized. Someone who easily called our parents old fools without even realizing how monstrous that sounded. Someone who planned to have more children, just to continue living at someone else's expense, taking it for granted. Someone who didn't even try to take responsibility for his life, but was ready to squeeze every last drop out of others. I didn't answer. I didn't even know what to say. Congratulate her on finally mastering the art of manipulation? Should I ask her how she's doing with professional gold diggers? Instead, I just closed my laptop, hoping to forget about this conversation, erase it from my memory, and put it out of my mind. But the words kept ringing in my head. These old fools will pay for everything. However, fate had other plans. A few months later, my phone rang, and when I saw a name on the screen that hadn't appeared there in over a year, for a moment I thought I'd misheard it, that it was some kind of mistake, that it couldn't be that she suddenly decided to get in touch again. Mom. I barely answered, my fingers hovering over the screen, ready to press reject at any moment, but something inside me, maybe curiosity, or maybe some stupid, stubborn hope that remorse would sound in her voice, made me press accept the call. Lucinda, she said, and I knew immediately that something had changed. There was no habitual coldness in her voice, no confident insistence with which she was accustomed to impose her decisions on me, no reproach, or even anger. There was something else: fatigue, defeat, as if she had spent all her strength, as if the events of the past few months had broken her, and now she did not know how to bring it all back. We need to talk. Can you come over? I should have said no. I should have reminded her how she kicked me out of the house, how she preferred a sister who manipulated them. I should have told her that I no longer cared about them, but instead I heard my own voice saying, "Good." The familiar streets I had once walked along now seemed alien to me, as if I were visiting a place I had once seen in a dream, but which had long since been no part of my reality. Everything in the house was almost the same as the last time I was here, but my parents looked older. Dad had more gray in his hair, Mom's face was lined with new wrinkles, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant tension. They were sitting in their usual place on the couch, but there was no shadow of their former confidence in their poses. Instead, I saw fatigue, a heaviness that seemed to weigh on them, making them a shadow of themselves. "We took extra shifts," Dad said without any introduction, his voice hoarse with fatigue, as if he hadn't slept for several nights. "We're working overtime to help your sister and Jason." I didn't say anything, just waited, watching the clock tick away the seconds in silence, until Mom spoke again. "We know you're doing well at work." Her voice was careful, as if she was trying to find words that wouldn't provoke my resistance, but anxiety was already rising in my chest. "And we thought it was time for you to help support your sister." It took me a few seconds to realize the meaning of her words, but when it finally reached me, I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't a joyful laugh or even a nervous chuckle. It was a real, loud, sincere laugh filled with disbelief, a laugh that reverberated through the room, bouncing off the walls, and I saw my parents shrink away from it, as if I had hit them with words. "I'm sorry," I said, barely catching my breath. Did you really just say that? You want me to what?" "Your sister can't work right now." Mom leaned forward, her voice trembling, but there was still the same urgency with which she always got her way. "She needs to take care of the baby. It's a full-time job." "What about Jason?" I looked at her coldly. "Does he need help with the baby too?" The silence is too loud, too meaningful. I looked from one parent to the other, looking at their faces, at these people who raised me, who once taught me responsibility, who told me about the importance of education, who insisted that I work in college so that I wouldn't rely on others, and now these same people were sitting in front of me. I was the one who came up with excuses for two adults who could have worked but chose not to. "Let's get this straight," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully so as not to lose my temper, so as not to let my emotions get the better of me. "You work overtime to support my sister and her fiancé, who are both able to find work but don't want to, And now you want me to start helping them live off someone else? Dad's face turned red, and I knew that sign, a sign that he was angry, but not because I was wrong, but because I had told the truth, which he did not want to hear. You're selfish and greedy if you don't want to help your family. His voice was strained, compressed, as if he was holding back even harsher words. If you refuse, consider yourself rejected. I looked at him, at my mother, at their aged, exhausted faces, and suddenly realized that I felt nothing but fatigue. You can't renounce something that doesn't exist anymore, I said softly, got up and left their house, hoping that this was really the last time. The sound of the door closing behind me sounded like the end of a very long, drawn-out sentence, and when I returned home to my apartment, it seemed even more comfortable than before my real home, the only place where I was free from their expectations and demands. I kicked off my shoes, made myself a cup of tea, sat down at my computer and slowly, methodically opened my email, finding the same message that Emily had sent me a few months ago. The one in which she told me without hesitation how she was deceiving her parents, how she called them old fools, how she was using their money, and how she planned to have more children so that she could continue to sit on their necks. I stared at it for a long time, my cursor hovered over the forward button. Part of me was hesitating. Was this a betrayal? Was it revenge? But then I remembered that it wasn't me who had committed the betrayal, but her, and that maybe my parents deserved to know the truth about what they were supporting, spending their energy, their health, their lives. I made a click without adding any explanations, no comments. I just let the truth speak for itself. I forwarded the letter to my mom. Not a word, not an explanation, just a dry fact, only her own daughter, her youngest, her favorite, who wrote in black and white that she perceives her parents as nothing but a resource, without feeling any love or respect for them. Sometimes the pure truth is stronger than any comment, and I no longer wanted to explain what should have been obvious anyway. Mom didn't answer. A week passed in silence, and I was already beginning to think that everything had been left without consequences, that they either didn't believe it or chose to turn a blind eye to it, as they always did when it came to Emily. But then the phone rang, and when I looked at the screen, I saw the name of Aunt Sarah, my mother's sister, the one who had always been the family's unofficial news channel, ready to bring the latest information at any moment. You won't believe what happened, she began with a voice full of family gossip, and I immediately imagined her sitting in the kitchen, holding the phone to her ear, probably still in her nurse's coat after a night shift at the hospital. Your parents kicked Emily out of the apartment. I almost dropped my coffee cup. What? Apparently, there's been a major quarrel, Aunt Sarah continued eagerly. Your mom found out that Emily was bullying them behind their backs, that she planned to take advantage of them as soon as the child was a little older. They told her and Jason to get out and that they wouldn't give them any more money. I listened to Aunt Sarah happily retell the entire drama to me, describing in detail the explosive confrontation, every detail, every line, as if she were retelling the series, but I barely heard her, too stunned by the sudden turn of events. Emily was screaming and crying, of course, she continued, almost savoring the details. You know, her signature style. She used all her usual dramatic techniques, accusing them of cruelty, of leaving her on the street with a baby, but your mother was frighteningly calm. She just said that they had been treated like fools for long enough. And Dad? Oh, he seems to have finally taken a firm stand, Aunt Sarah grinned. He said that they have 3 days to move out, and that they won't get another cent from him. Jason just stood there, helpless as a deer in the headlights. After I hung up the phone, still trying to process what I'd heard, I didn't have to wait long to predict the next step. The phone rang again. I looked at the screen and saw Emily's name. I didn't pick up the phone right away, but not because I was afraid of this conversation. On the contrary, I knew all too well what it would be like. After all, I've always known my sister. When I finally clicked accept call, I heard her voice, full of tears, the same trembling voice she used as a child when she wanted to beg for something. Lucinda, her voice was shaking, filled with fake sobs. Can we stay with you until we figure this out? Please. We have nowhere else to go. No. I said it calmly, firmly, surprised at how easy it was to pronounce that one word, as if it had just come out of my mouth, as if I'd been carrying it inside me for too long. You are the same as Mom and Dad. Emily screamed, and her tears were instantly replaced by anger. You're all so selfish. We're a family. Family doesn't exploit family, I replied quietly, and before she could object, I pressed end call. Later, I heard from Aunt Sarah that Emily, Jason, and their child had moved in with his parents. Apparently, Jason's mother was a strict, serious woman, the one who believed in tough love and responsibility, exactly the type of parents who did not tolerate either freeloading or manipulation. According to Aunt Sarah, Emily was unhappy. Her mother-in-law forced her to follow a strict schedule, help around the house, raise the child herself, and not pass it on to others. She could no longer just leave the baby in the care of others, going about her business, could not lazily scroll through the phone while someone else was cooking, could not just take money without making any effort. She spent her days crying, complaining about how unfair life was, how no one understood her, and how hard it was to be a mother without the constant financial support of her parents, who had been solving her problems all her life. Life tends to shut itself in. A few weeks later, I celebrated my birthday with friends in my apartment, no longer a tiny studio, but a pretty two-room apartment that I bought with my savings and a good credit history, without anyone's help, without other people's money, without the feeling that someone could take away this house from me at any moment. The house. I invited a small company, several close friends with whom we worked together, who were pleasant to talk to, who knew what I was going through, and who did not try to use me for profit. Nothing special, just good food, pleasant company, an evening full of laughing voices, the smell of a warm dinner, the clink of glasses. At some point, I stopped for a moment, looked at my cozy living room, where my friends were sitting, at the table covered with dishes that I cooked myself, at the warmth and tranquility that filled the space, and thought about how good it was that I once said no. During dessert, when the aromas of vanilla ice cream and caramel sauce were still in the air, when friends were laughing, clinking glasses and telling funny stories, the door suddenly rang, and, excusing myself, I headed for the entrance, not expecting anything special. However, when I opened the door and saw the courier standing in front of me with a small package in his hands, something inside me shrank. Lucinda. I nodded, signed the invoice automatically, and, closing the door behind me, walked slowly to the kitchen table, feeling an incomprehensible chill run down my spine. It was an ordinary, unremarkable piece of mail, but as soon as I saw the return address, my breath caught in my throat. The package was from my parents. I sat with the box in front of me, not daring to open it, as if it might explode the moment I lifted the lid, as if there was something more weighty inside, something that could change everything. Carefully removing the packaging, I saw a silver photo frame, elegant, but not flashy, the one in front of which I once stopped in a store many years ago, when my mother and I were choosing something for my diploma. I looked at it for a long time, noting how beautiful it was, how perfect it would have been for that very certificate of years of study and work, but its price was too high for my student budget, and I then waved it off, saying that I would take something simpler. I slowly ran my finger over the cool metal, and then I saw a postcard inside. I'm sorry. We miss you. When you're ready, we'd like to talk. Only 9 words. The handwriting belonged to my mother, but my father's signature was next to it. No demands, no reproaches, just that. I sat for a long time, holding the frame in my hands, staring at these simple lines, trying to understand how I feel, and, it seems, not finding an answer. My friends noticed my confusion and started asking if everything was okay, but I honestly didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that a silver frame can feel both like an olive branch and like a weapon that was thrown 2 weeks ago? I put it on the coffee table, where it could stand among other things that had become part of my new home, but at the same time stood out among them, reminding me of what was left behind. I had attached the postcard to the refrigerator, and now, every time I opened it, I saw these words, read them over and over again, trying to figure out how sincere they were, how ready I was to accept them. I didn't call. The pain was still there, dull but not going away, getting worse when I thought about everything that had happened. I've heard fragmentary stories from relatives about how things are going with Emily. She still lived with Jason's parents. Her mother-in-law still kept order in the house, did not allow her to be lazy, force her to get up early, help with the housework, take care of the child herself, and not shift it to others. Jason now worked at a local warehouse. He had a permanent position, and they had to contribute to household expenses, as well as save money if they ever wanted to move out and live separately. And, perhaps for the first time in her life, Emily was faced with real life, with the need to work, and not just wait for someone to solve her problems. I hoped that this experience would change her, that maybe she would understand what our parents couldn't teach her. Maybe one day she'll realize that love doesn't mean indulging in bad behavior, that being a family doesn't mean exploiting each other, that respect needs to be earned rather than demanded, and that responsibility is more important than privilege. I wasn't mad at her anymore. I was just sorry that she had been on this path for so long, sorry that she didn't realize how much she would have to pay for it now. And I was fine. My career was booming. I had just received another promotion. Now I managed my own team. I could choose the projects I wanted to participate in, and finally I felt that I was exactly where I should be. I had friends who understood boundaries and respected my independence, with whom I could talk, laugh, relax, without fear that expectations or manipulation were hidden behind it. I learned to set healthy boundaries, say no without feeling guilty, and stand up for myself without feeling obligated to save those who don't want to save themselves. Sometimes I missed the family I thought I had, but every day I realized more and more clearly that it had never been the way I imagined it to be. A silver frame stood on the coffee table, reminding me of what I had lost and what might still be restored if one day I felt ready. When the pain subsides enough that forgiveness becomes possible. When will I be able to look at my parents and not see the people who betrayed me, but see people who also made mistakes, who could learn, could admit, could try to fix? But not now. Right now, I was focused on my life, on my own path, on my growth, on building my future, and not trying to pull something out of the past that could no longer be saved. My apartment was gradually turning into a real home, a place full of things that I had chosen and earned for myself, a space where I was calm and safe, where every decision belonged only to me. I was planning a vacation for the next month, the first real vacation after college that I could go on without guilt, without anxiety, without looking back. I even thought about getting a dog, a little shaggy friend who would meet me at the door and bring joy to the house that I had been learning to make my own for so long. Small steps towards building the life I want. And not the one that others tried to impose on me.